morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. This show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA metropolitan area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what they've been up to in their life recently. And my guest this evening is, this is the third time is the charm, is Chris Thorne, who's been on every month now. This is the third month. And the reason that he's been on so many times is because we never get to the main subject of what the show is about. The title of the show is A Bittersweet Experience, Rwanda, A Bittersweet Experience. This is episode 3, because this time we're going to limit our conversation and visiting and talk about the fish farm in Rwanda.
I'm all in favor of that. Absolutely. Thank you.
How are you feeling right now?
I feel good. I feel good.
You always feel good.
Well, most of the time, yeah.
And the reason we have this unusual situation is because you and I get bantering back and forth, and you're so darn interesting. And
We're
so
both easily distracted.
And I enjoy your company anyhow. In
That's true.
Whatever fashion, yeah. So, anyhow, before we talk about Rwanda and what was going on over there, I want to tell you viewers about the loss of one of our crew members a couple of weeks ago, Rick Williams, who was with us for years and years, probably 15 years or so. And through the years, we've enjoyed each other and had some fun and some hard work together. But anyhow, I asked the crew to prepare a few remarks to indicate to you what they thought of Rick. And there's Rick right now on the screen right now. Hi, Rick, buddy. So I'm going to read what the crew members said. It'll take a minute or so bear with me. One of our favorite fellow human beings and camera persons, Rick Williams, passed away peacefully during the night of September 26, 2015. After a long battle, Rick finally lost his fight. Following are a few brief comments from some of his fellow crew members about Rick and his in-studio shenanigans during their years-long relationship with him. We will miss him. We all agree on that. Now, here's a comment by Roger Bates. He's a crew member and at-large and post-production technician, Roger Bates. Roger says, I only knew Rick as a member of the studio crew. As such, he was a quiet man who simply did his job as cameraman. While mostly listening to the occasional banter in the control room, Rick would occasionally add a comment from his decidedly right-wing perspective, but never as an argument. During the last few months, Rick missed many recording sessions while receiving chemotherapy, but when he was present, he always had a quiet, peaceful, accepting attitude that I will always admire and respect. And now Ted Ucho, our audio person who's been with us for many, many years too, had this to say about Rick. I think about Rick Williams' military stories, political commentary, and our friendship. I'll miss him. And now, as the producer and host of the show, my comments. Rick's incredible ability to accommodate others' political views might be contrary to his own bespoke willingness to stay tuned in to the on-camera comments by a left-leaning guest despite his obvious distaste for such views. His dedication to the principle of freedom of speech and his own gentleness of character was a hallmark of his loving character and friendliness. It was interesting to see Rick accommodate my own liberal leanings despite his apparent disagreement with my own leftist views. And I wish I had some memories and recordings of those adventures between Rick and I. I'm a screaming lefty, and Rick was a screaming rightist. And through all that was going on, we never had a fight through all the years here. We always loved and liked each other. And I'll miss you too, Rick. So thank you. So thank you for allowing me to pay tribute to Rick. So let's get back here to Chris Thorne. And are you still feeling okay?
I still feel fine.
You're going to be that way all the way through the show?
I don't know. We'll see, won't we?
We're not going to have a fourth episode, did you know?
Oh, yeah, I realize this is the last one. So let's have at it.
Okay. Let's do a little bit about who you are personally, okay?
Now, this is what's gotten us into trouble before. You realize that, of course.
So you want to volunteer some personal information about yourself, or shall I ask you some questions?
We've walked down this road before.
Oh, many times.
All right, maybe we should refer people to the first two. They should go back and look at the first two interview sessions.
Go to Don
All right,
Baham
but-
YouTube,
Yeah.
and you'll see the who my friend Chris is. But in the meantime, say when and where were you born?
I was born in Charleston, West Virginia in 1937.
And
I grew up in New York City.
Yeah.
I hit the road when I was about 15 and a half, and I have never looked back. I've been on the road ever since.
All these years?
Oh, yeah.
My goodness, yeah. And you had a lot of education. And what did you do in your work life all those years?
No, I'm not going there. I'm telling you. We get started talking about that. We're covering, from the time I left home, we're covering something like 61 years. I'm not going there again. We went through that in the first two
Okay, I'll
sessions.
ask you a few questions about it. You work for the federal government.
I've been in the military. I have worked for the Department of State, USAID, and what else? And I've been with the UN, and
With the UN.
almost
yeah.
20 years with the UN, with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees.
All over the world, many places in Asia.
Great many places.
And in Africa.
Asia, but the larger part of my work was with UNHCR was in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where I prefer to work anyway.
Are you still getting a check from the CIA?
I've never gotten a check from the CIA.
I was surprised you.
Yeah, right.
And you're on your toes pretty good, yeah.
Okay.
And you had a partner?
Yes, my wife is a Rwandan. We
Uh-huh.
met in Cameroon when we were both working for UNHCR.
Yeah.
I was in northeastern Nigeria. She was working in northern Cameroon when we met.
And she's still in Rwanda.
Yeah, right. She comes and visits every once in a while.
Uh-huh. Persons from the past that are alive today that you look up to or admire, and then we'll move on.
Well, I already told you that if somebody I'd like
Well,
to
tell me again.
I'd like to sit down and talk with Wynton Marsalis. I think that would be kind of cool.
Uh-huh.
And if we could do time travel and that sort of thing, I think I'd like to, if he has the time, I'd like to sit at the feet of Gautama the Buddha and listen to what he has to say personally, rather than hear it through all of the filters that take place when people who teach orally are transcribed by their disciples.
Are you a Buddhist?
No, I'm not anything that has to do with an organized religion. But I think that there are a great many tenets of Buddhist philosophy that I embrace that I think are cool, and there are things that I like reincarnation that I don't really understand, and so, I would need to spend a lot more time. But within the Buddhist concept, the next incarnation, if that occurs, will give me another shot at trying to figure out what that's all about.
When you figure it out, will you let me know?
Oh, absolutely! You'll be one of the first.
So. Now, we've got some questions I'll ask you about what you'll be talking about when Rwanda and...
You're going to ask me those questions
Kigembe.
after, right?
Yeah, after.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I'm going to keep you on the straight and narrow.
I know you will. I
right.
can depend on that.
I'm going to do my best. All right.
So shall we let you start, and then I'll ask you questions later on?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is just physically talk about what this farm... A lot of people, when they think about fish farms, they think about 3 ponds out in the North 40 or something like that. And this was a significantly different situation. This was a large 120-acre farm. And I think if we could put, we did a topographical map as part of our research for this investigation of this project.
How did you get the wherewithal to be able to plan this sort of a project? You have any experience doing that?
Oh, there's the map.
Uh-huh.
Basically, it is a 120-acre valley including all the way up ridgeline to ridgeline, from east to west, would have been about maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles across.
That's big, man.
And the farm was almost exactly 1 kilometer long. But if you can go back up to the top of the map again, you begin to see, there we go. What made this a design masterpiece, built by the Belgians with slave labor, essentially in 1950s, early 1950s. And there are 2 rivers at the top of that map that come together, the Akagera and the Mengini.
And this is in Rwanda.
Right, in southern Rwanda.
Rwanda.
Right on the border with Burundi. And the 2 rivers come down, and they continue as the Mengini down through between the 2 lines of the larger ponds that you see, the 2 production ponds. And then they exit the other end. And what the Belgians had done in their design is they put diversions upper part of the map before the rivers come together, and they brought it in, channeled it in at levels above the base of the valley. And that meant they didn't have to use machine. It's gravity fed. Mm-hmm. So you had 120 acres of land to work with, 32 production ponds, the larger shaded areas that you see. You have 17 on one side and 15 on the other. Each one of those ponds on an average was about 50 meters wide and 100 meters long, about the size of a football field. Mm-hmm. So that meant that most of the ponds could hold at least 6,000 or 7,000 fish. At the time that we took over the farm, we salvaged some, but we got most of our basic stock, and our plan was, and we got into it and we made that work, was to raise, as a primary fish would be tilapia, and we were going to use clarias, which is it's a cousin to the catfish, as a birth control mechanism. In other words, they would be put in at a time when they could not, the clarias were too small to eat the fish we were raising for market, but they would be very happy to eat all of the fry that were created by the tilapia. In other words, the tilapia having a very, very short gestation period. Tilapia think they're rabbits, right? I mean, they just 6-8 weeks, they're making babies. And one of the biggest problems in running a fish farm operation is overstocking, especially with tilapia, because they breed so quickly. Mm-hmm. All right? So if you want them, and fish will stunt. If you get overstocked, the fish will stop growing, right? They will diminish their size as they run out of that 1 cubic meter of water that they need to grow to full size.
And they sense that.
Well, biologically, they just handle it. That's how they accommodate to a change in their environment. And you can end up, if you're badly overstocked, with a fish that looks like a piranha that is a great big head and a very small body, because the head still develops pretty much along the same lines. Anyway, when we first saw this place, I had been on the ground. My wife had been anxious to get back to Rwanda for quite some time. She had come out in 1959 when there was the first genocide, the one that very few people know about. And that was where about 200,000 Tutsis were killed, and over 1 million, 1.5 million went into the diaspora, both locally, inter-regionally, and then off to Europe and North America.
About what year was that?
That was 1959.
59.
They call them the 59ers. They call themselves that in some respects. And that diaspora had a lot to do with the way things shaped up as we got things working. When we first came in, nobody really even knew what was there. We had about 175 people that helped us clear the land. What might be a good idea is for us to run the slideshow that we have, mm-hmm. and I can talk about that as we run through.
Of course. Because
it talks about first what we found and what we did, and then what we were forced to leave.
The we, who was the we you're talking about?
Well,
you and who else? And all the workers or
yeah.
other managers? Were you our boss or what?
Yeah, I was basically the boss.
I know. I wanted to hear you say it though. But
no,
it was your show.
It was my show. It was my idea, something I had been thinking about doing and studying about doing. I have no formal training. All right, when we came in, we found that the secondary roads were shot to hell. This whole place was overgrown from one end to another. That's about a 46 tree guava orchard. That's the only remains of the only bridge that went across between the two ponds, and most of the sheds had been stripped clean.
When you first acquired it.
Yeah, right. And you can see all of the roadways, the canals that fed into the ponds. This was the condition that we found them in. There'd been a big fire it was the former National Fish Station. So they had a resident training center, and they had, with complete toilets and kitchens and things like that. But they had been pretty badly destroyed.
The fire destroyed them, or something else destroyed them?
No, it's people. People vandalized them. There was a war, okay?
Oh,
and then
yes.
you had the genocide. That's a latrine, actually. And that was the director's house, which all of this stuff got repaired. Everything got built back up. And this is a long view of there are ponds in there, and you can't even see them.
This
right?
is before you started reworking it.
That's what we found when we came in.
I see.
It was a wreck. And we found it in 1996, but because nobody really understood who owned what, the people were at that point still digging out of a very deep hole. When the genocidaires left Rwanda, they took anything that wasn't nailed down, dug some deep holes, wrecked the banking system, everything like that. So you got to give a lot of credit to the guys that came in there and began to put that country back together. Paul Kagame and his people did a heroic job.
Paul Kagame
was the leader of the army, the commander-in-chief of the army after their original commander was killed in combat, and he was the driving force. He was the leader of the Rwandan Popular Front, the army for the Rwandan Popular Front. And they did an incredible job. There's no doubt about it. We came in '96. The genocide was in 1994. Okay?
Why was there a genocide?
Why?
Yes. Who were the two factions involved?
Well, no,
There's
that's
three
a
factions?
history lesson. And I mean, that's a long history lesson, because that goes all the way back to the German and Belgian and French colonizing
I thought you had a brief
of
comment
Africa.
about that. That's okay.
Well, it basically was a struggle between two groups of people who have been delineated by colonization.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay, and that's the Hutu and the Tutsi, all right? And there are a lot of interesting things you can get into about that, because like most of the African continent, sub-Saharan African continent, everything that went on there has been so badly twisted and chewed around, and everybody trying to make themselves look good as colonizers and make pretty much everybody else look bad as ignorant savages that didn't know any better.
And
nothing could be farther than.
And they
from the truth.
succeeded for many, many years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're still succeeding today. It's just
Still
more
succeeding
subtle.
today.
Right. Colonization goes on and on. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
we cleared the place. We got the power back in. We repaired a generator. Let me run the part of it that deals with what we did. This is what we did. Hi, that's me down there. Anyway,
Good pictures, man.
these are. You said who did it? These people did it. These are people from the 3 communes surrounding. This is the beginning of clearing all of that green you saw to get to the pond, so we could begin to repair those 32 production ponds.
How long did it
We
take to
found
clear?
stuff that had been completely destroyed. That's a line of chicken hutches. Some of the finest carpenters and masons that I have ever worked with anywhere in the world rebuilt this, and we rebuilt it. The only thing that we used that we didn't grow ourselves or harvest ourselves was cement. That's all. Everything else came from what you saw in the original picture. Then we had to rebuild the walls. All of these ponds had walls, stone and mortar walls around them, okay? Because they were straight up and down things. And then we had to repair the diversions, because they were not the kind of diversions that could hold the water back. They had to be continually maintained, and part of our production plan was to repair those. So the work continued, and it took a lot less time than anybody ever thought it would take. And we found ourselves within a 6-month period, we had 40,000 fish growing in 8 ponds, and then we did the map study. That's a surveyor team that came up with the map. We paid for that because the government had neither the resources or anything, and that's where this map came up.
Where'd you get the money to pay for that?
Okay, we'll get to that. We
Okay.
started harvesting fish within 10 months after we were on the ground. We were harvesting fish and bringing about a ton and a half a week
10 months.
to Butari, which is about 20 kilometers away. And we took them. We had, this is it, my Land Rover and a truck we had acquired. We started out selling it from the back of the truck, right? Then we acquired a site. That artist's name is, his trade name is Picasso. The graphic that they put up was my son, who's a graphic artist as well. He put up, he began that, he began the, he painted the front wall of the boutique.
Mm-hmm.
And problem was, we were, from the very beginning of this project, we kept running into problems. And there were the government, in the form of President Kagame. As vice president, he was a booster. But once he had become president, and it didn't really make a lot of difference, he was the titular vice president, but Paul's always been in charge, right? And it's a highly centralized chain of command, all right? At any rate, we ran into problems with this from the get-go. But I'd like to continue with what we did. We've done that. And then I want to show you what we had to leave, and then we can just run our mouths and talk about it.
Sure, you bet.
Right? This is what we were forced to leave behind, and we'll talk about the force, all right?
Okay.
That's what we brought back together. It was there before, but it had been completely obliterated.
And you did that in 10 months?
We were all the way up to the 8th or 9th pond within a 10-month period, and we're harvesting fish. That's, the first one was the west line, and the second one, this one, is the east line. All of the irrigation, several kilometers of irrigation canals and things, all rebuilt. All of the outbuildings save for the restaurant. We never got to deal with the restaurant. That was essentially our command center. That was a place that had blackboards and things. That was an old USAID project, solar fish drying, and we found it was just a wreck. It was the frame, so we rebuilt it and we used it. I had budgeted $3,000 to repair the power source. We found bees in all the houses. We smoked them and took them to, that's that orchard you saw first off, the one you couldn't see. We got 4 tons of guava out of that the first harvest. Took 3 years to bring it up to harvest. And those are pigsties. And it's an integrated fish farm, which means 19 of these ponds had sheds either adjacent to the ponds or over the ponds. And that was part of the composting you use to create phytoplankton, which is what tilapia fingerlings eat until they get up to about 20 grams to 40 grams. I'm sorry we can't go back. These are kids that called the Rwanda Yeju. That's the name they gave themselves, some more Rwanda Yeju. But before that, we had a security force. They were pretty cool. I call these guys our mobile daycare center, right? Because these are the elder children of workers, and that's the replacement for that bridge you saw in the beginning.
Wow.
Right? And in all of the time that I was there was never, even though they had the worst drought in 80 years, there was never any, how do I put it? There was never any loss of water. And that's because Rwanda's an aquafilter. It's the headwaters for the Nile.
Sure.
Anyway, and who were we? We were forced to leave these people. These people were phenomenal. They had come through a genocide, a war, and it didn't dampen their spirits at all. They're what I miss most, who I miss most in this whole exercise.
What tribe are these people from?
It doesn't make any difference because that's a mythology.
Okay.
All right, and we can talk about that later.
Sure.
All of those irrigation systems were repaired. We had created a viable working fish farm, which turned out to be, we became the victims of our own success.
That says a lot. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that later on.
All right. And that's basically That's a working farm that you're looking at, and these are the people who made it work and kept it working. And the average staff was about 87 people. This lady went on to run her own chicken business and her own duck business. These are the Rwanda Yezu, and I'll tell you about them later. And that's the heaviest work that children ever did. And that was our boutique with my son's graphic at the top, only Picasso put the fish in there. And that's it. That's what we were forced to leave, a working fish farm. Now, I'm sure you have a lot of questions now. You asked me one, and you said, where'd you get the money to do this?
Yeah. That's a good start.
Yeah, sure. Well, I cashed in 46% of my pension from the UN, and that was essentially because my idea of coming out was to build myself a fish farm. I didn't know that this place existed, okay?
But this was in your mind before you knew this place existed.
I had been thinking about fish farming since 1976, 77. When was it? Not then. Yeah, 76, 77.
What prompted that?
Well, I went down to Lesotho to do a management consulting job for USAID from 76 to 78. Yeah. And it was the buzzwords then were management by objective. And we were supposed to be training people how to manage by objective. And what we did was we took all of everything that had to do with food, agricultural production, aquaculture, agriculture, everything that had anything to do with food and nutrition. We brought all of those entities together, agencies together, and we began working on it. I didn't know anything about food and nutrition, so I had to cram, I had to bone up on it, right? And in doing that, I found out that one of the best conversion rates, food to flesh, was fish. You know, from what you feed an animal to what you get. Like you have to feed, for 1 kilo of beef, you got to feed the beef. 1 kilo of beef is like 40 kilos of grain.
Yes.
That's why I call them four-legged locusts.
That's interesting, four-legged locusts.
Yeah, right. At any rate, and that's when I started thinking about aquaculture. And every place I went, I got hooked on it. And I got some books and I started reading. And my dad taught me, he said, if you can read and understand what you're reading, you can do anything you want to do. I said, even build rockets, Dad? He said, even build rockets, right? All right.
You kind of liked your dad, didn't you?
Yeah, I liked him a lot. And for all of the time that since that point, that was over 20 years, I became a very well-read layman. And I talked to the guys who were the practitioners on the ground, and I would travel the world. And I would talk to fish farmers, big fish farmers, little fish farmers down in the Delta in the United States, fish farmers up in the mountains of Malaysia and stuff like that.
Even in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm saying down in the Delta, you know. And the differences, it was marvelous, and it was great. I was enjoying it. I said, I really would like to do that. But family and responsibilities, and you kind of sidetrack to make sure you're keeping your promises to the people you care about.
Sure.
And even the people you don't care about, you keep your promises to. And when I finally had enough of the UN, and it was time for me to move on, and Susanna wanted to come back home. She wanted to get back to the land of her birth. And then the genocide took place, and that delayed our departure to come back soon. Before that, Burundi had blown up, and my sister-in-law had asked us if we would take one of the children, because in Burundi, at that time, it blew up because they were living in Burundi. And we said, but you're talking about the 3 girls who are like Krista, my daughter's sisters, and they have never been separated, so send them all. So for a brief period in my life, I was totally surrounded by all of these beautiful, great women, young women, and my wife, and just a glorious time we had. But we also had to delay our departure while they finished the section of their schooling that they were in, so there wouldn't be that kind of a disruption. So we finally got back in '96. By the time I'd been there for a month, we had traveled all over the country except for the Northwest, which was which was still kind of warm, hot is what it was, because they just pushed, people were trying to push back in from, the genocidaires were trying to push back in. There's a lot of problems still existed. But the last place that we went, I found a lot of places that used to be fish farms, but I didn't find anything that really existed anymore. And I was getting ready to pick one of the places to do that. I went down to the university, and they said, the guy ran the fish ponds at the research center at the university. Said, "Have you been to Kigembe?" I didn't know what it was. He said, "That's the National Fish Station."
Kigembe.
And we went out there, and that's what we found. It was there. And it took us 3 years to get on the ground. And in the 3 years that it took us to get on the ground, they stopped. Nobody did anything to take care of it. Up until we got there, there was a World Food Program, Food for Work program, that had at least maintained the ponds. Everything that we saw was pristine, you know, in that area, in the center area there.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the most important areas, but not the only important area. But in the 3 years, from 1996 to 1999, when we got on the ground there, it had been vandalized. People had ripped places apart. They'd taken the walls out of 4 of the ponds, you know, to build infrastructure for
What about law enforcement and police? And
all of that was building. You got to realize the country was wrecked. One of the problems with a very small country, all right, when it goes through that kind of trauma, the recovery cycle it's true, it's real trauma. The only thing, when we walked into the area where we were working in Butari province at that time, the Butari region had been the most successful part of the genocide. Some 95, 96% of the Tutsis in that area had been killed. The people in that area had been killed. So what you had when you came back in, when we came in 96, things were beginning to move forward. A lot of work had already been done. Just clearing bodies off the streets was a major problem, all right? The conservative estimate is nothing like what the press did. The press suppressed the numbers. They said, 800,000 people. I don't know where they ever got that number. I came in with a member of the third international investigation group that went out into the countryside. And he said, I don't know where they're getting the numbers from. He said, our most conservative estimate in these 3 different times that we went out was a conservative 1.2 million people died.
That's a lot more than 800,000.
In 90 days. Nobody wanted it to go over 1 million people. And what you have to remember is it may have been state organized, but it was labor intensive. It wasn't railroad trains and death camps and things like that. It was people beating each other to death. If you were lucky, you could buy a bullet. All right?
Let me make a slight digression here.
Sure.
The movie about Rwanda?
Well, there are several. Which one are you talking about?
That big one where...
Oh, you're talking about the one that's popular in the States, Hotel Rwanda? Built on a lie.
Rwanda. It was a lie?
Built on a lie. The hero, and the guy got a Medal of Freedom or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
one
just not true.
Most Americans have seen. That's why I use that as a reference.
That's Hollywood.
Okay.
That's all of the popular stars and things. You want to see good movies about Rwanda, see Sometimes in April.
Sometimes in
That's
April.
Raoul Peck, the guy that did the Mobutu film.
Mm-hmm.
And Shake Hands with the Devil, the one that the Canadian guys made about Romeo Dallaire, the UN commander, Colonel Dallaire, who was wrecked by this experience. Will probably never recover. I don't see how he could. And people don't realize that. It was labor intensive, slaughtering people. So when we came in, it was a country at that point filled with either perpetrators or survivors. Because everybody was involved in killing everybody else. Now,
you figure out what a motivation was to provoke these 2 groups of people to kill each other like that?
But that's what colonization was about. Whether it was the British, the French, the Belgians, I don't want to leave anybody out. The Spanish, whoever it was. And the British were the best at it. Theirs has been the most devastating kind of colonization. And one reason was because they had so few people to maintain it. The French popped in and they just said, in Africa and most other places, they came in and they said, we're stronger than you are, and you're going to do what we tell you to, and when you get as strong as we are, then you can kick us out. But they also joined the people. They became part of it. The British came out of that pre-Victorian and Victorian and Edwardian stuff, and they stratified the society, right? But the first thing that they always did was they would come in and they would find who was in charge, who is the ruling group of people, nation, tribe, whatever kind of a label you want to hang on it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get close to those guys, and then they would develop the power of the Avis group, the number 2 group, right? Mm-hmm. And they would pit these guys. It was divide and conquer.
Let's you and him fight, the classic game.
Yeah, divide and conquer. And then they embellished on that by drawing these arbitrary lines that went through.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, that went right through places where people had built nations. Sophisticated civilizations had grown in these areas. So you had all of this stuff going on. But when you look at it in microcosm, you look at a Rwanda in relative microcosm, and you look at it there, and you got to say, what happened to Kigembe Farm? Why does an entrepreneurial American guy comes in there, and he says, here's something I want to do, and I've studied it, and I've got my stuff together, and I can show you that I can do it, et cetera, and we're going to do it inside Rwanda. We don't want any government grants from outside. We don't want to do. We want basically to finance it through the development bank here in Rwanda. We're going to staff it with. I was the only expat. Oh, and there was a Ugandan guy who was working with me, and his father and I had been friends when I was working in Uganda, up in the West Nile region, and he asked me if I could teach his son something about building a business, and I said, I don't know, I'm learning myself. And he was a very, very bright kid. He also became problematic. He's an incredible womanizer, so he created a set of problems that's different. But anyway, I was the only expat in the whole operation, and
you had to leave finally.
Well, the first thing that happened was they changed. If I had been a businessman, if I hadn't spent most of my life in the public sector, I probably would have bolted early on in the game. One, when it took so much time once we'd identified it, and to identify it, okay, that would have chased a lot of businessmen. And this is at a time when businessmen from all over the world, that place was radioactive. Nobody wanted to do any kind of work in Rwanda. In 1994, 5, 6, 7. That didn't change until probably 2000, and then it changed very, very slowly. There were only 2 other Americans, and they were guys that ran tea plantations, okay, that were there when I was there. Anyway, and USAID had been there, but that's the government again. They had been at this farm, and it was a privatization project. The government, it was government-owned National Fish Station. Okay. So there was a competition, a privatization competition, and we won the competition with this business plan.
So that was a good privatization.
That's what it looked like, except that when we won the privatization thing, and it was a award, and then it gets into the whole business about U.S. representation in Rwanda, because we had very good representation from the second ambassador who was there. First ambassador was a cuckoo bird, and he told me when he found out what I was trying to do in '96, his name was Gribbins, and Ambassador Gribbins and I ran into each other at a fish farming conference, an aquaculture conference in Kigali, and he said, "You're that crazy American that's working, trying to do a fish farm down
Which
on the
endeared you to him,
border."
right?
And I said, I don't know about crazy, but I'm the American who's doing going to do the fish farm now. He said, don't you know this place is going to blow up? I said, I've been a lot of places that are in the process of blowing up, about to blow up, and have just blown up. And this place is not blowing up. I know when to flee and when to fight and all the rest of that stuff. Anyway, the second ambassador, George Staples, one of the finest representatives the United States has ever seen, not just because of this kind of support he gave me, but because of the kind of support that he gave. First time I met him, he said, we have, we're not really the 800-pound gorilla. I said, I've worked with ambassadors and their staffs in a lot of different countries. I said, I know what the constraints are, that there's just so much you can do. You cannot do very much arm twisting in the real sense of the word. I said, all I want you to do is shine a light on the process and keep the playing field level, which is exactly what he did. And he did it in an incredibly masterful way. And it lit up his career. It was supposed to be a retirement post. And he ended up the number 3 guy at the State Department. And it was based upon what he had done there. And every time I turned around, he was the first high-level dignitary to come out to the farm, even before Kigembe came out as vice president. At any rate, and he was there when we signed the lease. Now, in the preparation of the lease, there were only a couple of things that were non-negotiable. We had asked for a 30-year lease. And in the last minute, they said, well, we can't really give you 30 years. Well, let's cut it in half. We'll give you 15. And that's where I made a big mistake. I should have. Had a pro bono lawyer in Rwanda. He looked at it. He was busy, trying to get his practice started. I probably did not do the kind of due diligence that I should have done. Looking back, hindsight 2020.
So you're one of the guys who signed it, and the government.
I'm the guy who signed it.
And the government on the other side signed it.
Absolutely.
Gave you the lease.
Absolutely.
The government.
Absolutely.
Who was the head of the government then?
The head of the government was Paul Kigembe. The head of the government has always been Paul Kigembe.
Okay.
All right, and
so
will be.
The 2 of you signed the agreement.
Paul Kigembe didn't sign it. His Minister for Finance signed it.
Yeah.
His representative signed it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And George Staples showed up with his economic attaché and everything like that, just to sit in. He was so happy that this was going so well. Well, when we went around looking for financing in the investigative part of our own exercise, we went to the banks, all of them, and they said the same thing. You have to secure the property. Once you've got a lease, no problem. You can use the property as collateral, Pam. Slam dunk. Yeah? No. When we finally signed the lease, we went back to the development bank first, and then to the other banks. They all said the same thing. Oh, Rwandan law says if you have a lease that's less than 18 years, it can't be used as collateral. I'd already signed it and put $20,000 out of
your money,
my money, on the first year of the lease.
So your due diligence wasn't quite enough.
Oh, it wasn't due diligence. I was new in the game, and I've been in a number of games where when you're that new, I wanted to do it. I had a blind spot. An African American wanting to do well by doing good. And it would have lit up, and it did. For a while we were there, it lit up that economy and everything. And it got people, if you noticed in those slides, the difference between those people in the first slide of people walking out along the road, the difference simply in the way they dressed. We paid a living wage. We introduced, there was 3 times the so-called minimum wage for agricultural workers. Artisans made much more than that, but we had a rigorous training, testing program for all of the artisans, and they made more. We also brought banking into the thing because we didn't want to have payrolls, of that amount of money sitting on the farm, because people were getting killed for 50,000 Rwandan francs, and we had payrolls that were substantially larger than that. So we said, when you work for us, you got to have a bank account at the community, at the cooperative bank, and so we paid them through their bank accounts. When we put out the word that we were going to clean this farm site up, this fish farm, this fish station up, We put the word out. Everybody's got a radio. Everybody reads little newspapers and stuff like that. 4,468 people showed up looking for 187 jobs.
They really needed the work, eh?
There was no work. 7% of the people who came looking for jobs were women. So the first thing I did, and we went through this rigorous, I told everybody, if you can get into communal queues, we'll process everybody. I got a team up here that I put together from graduate students and baccalaureate students from the university that were statisticians and the like, people that could do stuff like this. I said, we're going to see all of you guys. All right, and we're going to process everybody, but we can only hire, at that point it was like 175, 180 people. Okay, everybody understood that. And then we just went through the process where most of the people, there were some people that were very well qualified and a large number of people who were close enough to make sense. But I said to my staff, I said, hey, 7%, and one of the guys, one of the closest friends that I had out there was, he looked at me and he said, yeah, the men told the women to stay home, that this was man's work. I said, oh, really? I like that. Let's see what we can do with that. We never had less than 48%, never less than 48% of the women, of the staff were women, okay, working, the workers on the farm. And in the entire farm, management and thing like that, it was more like 80%, because our management staff, there were a lot of women on the management staff, including my wife, who was my deputy for administration.
You come some kind of a socialist or radical leftist or communist? Or
I don't know what those, that's, you start putting labels on people, you're asking for trouble. And you're always asking for trouble.
I'm asking you.
I told you in a previous session that we...
Tell me again.
Am I a socialist? No. I believe that both capitalism and communism don't operate in the real world as any place close to what their manifestos say they should be doing, blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
They're twitched out of shape. Okay? I do believe that there is a meeting place in the middle between these two adversarial systems, and I would call it dynamic socialism. Or it could be called socialistic capitalism. I don't know. That gets it.
Sure.
But
All
dynamic socialism.
Uh-huh.
All right? What it means is that you basically have a form of government that has legitimate progressive taxing that allows for a government to be able to take care of people that have had a problem taking care of themselves, as well as making money and doing stuff and competing with each other.
Occasionally I ask you these kinds of questions that seem far-fetched, but they get an idea, your inner workings, where you're coming from, how it is you're looking at women in a different way than most capitalist entrepreneurs.
Well, most capitalist entrepreneurs don't care about sex. All they care about is those interchangeable and expendable pieces called workers. That's all they want, and then when they've used them, they throw them away. That's what capitalists do. All right?
Bottom line.
That's the bottom line. They don't care about it.
We could argue that.
Take a walk down the Rust Belt. Take a drive through the Rust Belt of the United States. Go down where I was born, where I went to college and stuff. Go down through Appalachia. Places haven't gone anywhere. They got used, abused, and thrown away. Mm-hmm. We have a political system that supports that.
So what are you going to do next? The same sort of adventure like this?
No.
You got another idea like this that you're going to implement?
I'm done. I'm done with that stuff. I'm going to basically kick back and enjoy myself and sit back. I don't want to get involved in a whole lot of other stuff. I'll be 80 years old in a couple of years, And I'm not getting it.
You're not done yet.
I'm not done, but I'm done doing a lot of the things that I've done.
But you enjoy
You know what's rough?
What?
I'm not talking about sitting in an office in Geneva and telling people to go out and do good work somewhere in the world, or sitting in an office in, pick a so-called third world country and sit in an office and tell and run a string of fish farms. I was a fish farmer. Fish farmers are either getting wet, or thinking about the next time they might get dry. You know, I've had dairy farmers tell me that they thought that dairy farming was the toughest farming around until they saw fish farmers and what they put up with. Okay, and I'm not talking about these massive projects. I'm talking about running a 120-acre farm. That's hard work. That's 4:30 in the morning, and I mean until 11:30 at night.
What you've got in your talent and your whole way of doing things is such that it's in demand.
That's why I'm in the best. What Richard Pryor used to say, and that's why I'm in the position I'm in today, is because I've got all of this stuff. I've done a lot of very interesting things in my life, and I can look back on the Michelangelo type works that I have created within my work experience, and I see the wreckage that's made by the people that came behind and were either threatened by it or didn't understand it. And it's very understandable, because what I do is really a threat to most people, to a great many people in bureaucracies. The threat is that I make things simple. Do you know they kept telling me I couldn't do this thing even when I was doing it? I had a veterinarian tell me I could not raise pigs that he was looking at. I had people tell me that there was no real possibility that this fish farm would ever become a moneymaker. I should be using the bamboo stands and use the ponds to raise bamboo for export to Europe and North America.
Did the fish farm become successful?
Yeah, up to a point. I never could reach my production goals because they kept rolling logs down the hill. We finally got some money. They let us, I ran out of my money, and they held off, but we held on to the farm.
Is it still in existence now?
Well, it's there, but it's there. I think they're great.
It producing? Is it working?
No, because the African Development Bank came in and offered the government. They were so impressed by what we had done on that farm, okay, our management skills and what we had actually showed them on the ground, and the methodology that we could put to work to raise. They asked us if we could raise 8 million fingerlings a year, and I showed them how I could take 10 of my ponds and raise 11 million fingerlings a year, and it was sound. It was just straightforward raising fish. It wasn't about rocket science.
And it isn't going on today.
No, because the government pushed us off the farm. That's why we were forced to leave it, because they didn't even respond to the offer until they had pushed us off the farm. And how did they push us? They just cut off all our financing.
Why'd they do that?
Because they didn't want anybody to be in control that wasn't Paul Kagame.
Paul Kagame is the bad guy.
Paul Kagame is a control freak. Bad guy? I don't know about that. That's a moral judgment.
Oh, well, the life of the population and the citizenry, are they better off under Paul Kagame or under somebody else?
I think that depends on who you talk to. Better off.
I'm talking to you.
All right. Let me ask you this question in return.
Okay.
Who's better off? The guy who's homeless outside of prison, or the guy who's locked in a prison and getting 3 hots in a cot?
Who's better off as the guy who has nothing to do with prison?
Oh, yeah?
Yes. There's a third
Rwanda's
a third
prison.
consideration.
No, I'm saying those are the options. You ask me, are the people better off
There's
because...
always other options, my friend. Don't narrow the discussion. Okay, let me stop picking on you. Now,
you can bring it on.
You've never done this before in all these years I've been on this show. 3 times in a row, and you're aggravating me again. I'm not going to let you on again.
Good.
You got to wait at least 3 months.
What? No. You're not going to say you're going to have me on again. Is that real? Is that clock real?
Yeah, you got you got about 2 minutes.
You see, you've done it again.
A final message to the viewers out there about what we're talking about, or any daunting else.
This entire project, okay, this experience, this bittersweet experience, was not only bitter because of what Kagame and company did in Rwanda. It's that whole system that supports it, called development assistance, which is an oxymoron. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that development aid, you've read the books, The Lords of Poverty and The Road to Hell. which is paved with good intentions, right? Okay? These systems, Frantz Fanon said that the UN was developed because war had become uneconomical in the wretched of the earth. That's a guy I wouldn't mind sitting down and talking to if I could. All right.
You
I'm
have
outta here.
30 seconds to say something to the viewers that would be of use for them. Considering
Before you invest in
Yeah.
anything called development assistance, I would strongly recommend that you find out how much of your dollar is actually going into something that helps not only sustain, but helps to truly develop the people that they're taking the money to work with. And most Americans don't do that. It's either NIMBY, not in my backyard, or IGATO, I gave at the office. And once you do that, then you walk away from it. But the development assistance, whether it's faith-based or government-operated, they don't work. They never have, because they weren't designed to work. They were designed to control people.
and have somebody have more power and more importance than other people. Well, we got to stop now because Ellery is going to beat us up if we don't quit now. So
I don't want to get beat up. Been there, done that. I don't want to be beat
It's been
up.
a good show, and thanks again for coming on.
Don, it is as always a pleasure, and I'm sorry that we won't be able to do this again.
Don't count on it.
All right. Well,
Some closing comments or some public service announcements, Mr. E. Can we do those? To get my show local broadcast schedule, go to my website, www.donbam.com, and click on Present Day Activities. To watch my shows on the web, go to Don Bam YouTube. Click on a particular show. There's a number of shows on my site. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, the American Civil Liberties Union is so important, I can't even say it, because our civil liberties in this country nowadays are in jeopardy. We need to protect our civil liberties, those that are remaining intact. Next, end corporate personhood. Go to movetoamend.org and learn how to end corporate personhood and reverse the Citizens United decision that says corporations are people and money is speech.
amen.
My friend. Thanks for watching. And remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly and be charitable to you too. And you too. And you too. Thanks, buddy.
Hey, thank you.
We'll see you next time. Good night.